today we're here to talk about a really important and a really big part about our jobs, and generally an important part of marketing in general, and that is customer surveys. We've divided this topic into 5 parts. And first one is why open-ended surveys are better than other kinds of surveys, because there's a million different ways how you can basically launch them. Then 2, how to come up with good survey questions and what is the process for launching the survey in general. Then 3, how should you go about analyzing the results from your survey. And 4, what are the problems with the current analysis process that we have been using and that is widely used for open-ended qualitative kind of data analysis. And 5, what is the solution for these problems and how we are trying to overcome them, and sharing a resource with you as well if you are into that sort of thing. Back to the first point. We're talking about open-ended surveys here. That can be one question, that can be many questions. You can also use this method of analysis that we're talking about on chat logs, for example.
So I think kind of one of the main points of what we're talking about is that there's a trade-off when it comes to designing a survey in terms of the value of the data that you get and the feedback that you get on one end of the spectrum, and then the other end of the spectrum is like easy analysis. So like if you're coding like an NPS survey or a multiple choice survey, there's basically no work involved. Like you basically just go through and this many people picked this answer, this many people picked this other answer, and it's easy. But you don't get much in terms of insight. All you get is like some numbers, and it doesn't give you any voice of customer. It doesn't really give you much to work with, especially on its own. Like if you're tracking, say something like NPS, if you're tracking it over time, or if you're comparing the NPS from different segments or something like that, then you can get some value out of it. But really, like what we like to focus on for CRO is learning what the customers say in their own words. And without like leading them or influencing them with our own biases and stuff like that. So that's why we push for open-ended surveys, even though it's way more difficult to code the responses and do the analysis part of it.
Point number 2, how to even start, how to come up with good survey questions, how should you launch it, what to consider, so on. So the type of surveys that we're basically talking about usually have like 8 to 10 questions. Over 10 is usually like an overkill because people get tired. They start like slacking off in the questions, not really giving you as insightful answers as you would hope for. So you should keep it as brief as you can, but usually I'd say like 8 to 10 questions is like a good number.
Yeah.
Then you also have to take into consideration how big of an email list do you have in your company, because the type of surveys that we're talking about usually are sent out via email. So if you have, I don't know, like 5-10 subscribers in your email list, then it's probably not the best research tool for you. Because with these surveys, you're looking to get at least 200 to 250 responses.
Yeah, if you have way fewer than that, you can still get some insight from it, but you're treating it more as like purely qualitative. Whereas the approach that we prefer to take is getting the strength of signal on qualitative answers. So, the people say what's on their mind in terms of responding to the question, and then you go through those and figure out like how many people said something about topic A versus topic B. So if you actually like want to have some confidence that, you know, saying 40% of the people mentioned, you know, price is a big problem for them, then you want to have enough responses so that you actually like have, you know, it's not like 40% of 10 responses or something. If it's 40% of 200, then you're getting a pretty good idea that this is a real issue and that it's coming up consistently.
Yeah, but sometimes 200 still seems like a very random number. Like, why not 300? I mean, the more the better, obviously, but like there is some solid math out there why you should shoot for at least 200, right?
Yeah, there's, we can probably link a resource for that as well, but basically, you know, it's kind of like statistical significance, but you're not comparing two different populations to each other. It's just like you know, getting a certain amount of responses so that you have some confidence in the results. And I mean, the other thing is, it also depends on like how small of issues that you want to be able to identify, because, you know, say you run a survey and you only get like 75 responses, then, you know, for the things that are top of the list, that like, you know, 60% of people are saying this, or 50 or 40, then you're still going to get pretty good signal on those things. But when you get down into the things that only like 10 people mentioned or 5 people, then it's like, you know, is that just a blip, or is that something you need to take seriously?
Yeah, another thing we should talk about is the customer segments that you want to send your potential survey to. That again, like, depends on the size of the list that you have. It's like if you have 200 people in your list, then probably it doesn't make sense to start segmenting them and sending individual surveys to different kinds of people. But if you have a good solid size of subscribers for your product or website or whatever, then you should try to really narrow it down of what you're actually trying to find out.
Yeah, like it depends on what questions you're asking and what data you're looking for some information about.
Basically, the usual segments for like big e-com companies are post-purchase, then people who recently bought are a really good segment.
Yeah, like it's, say you're trying to get an idea of friction or hesitations that people encountered when they're going through your checkout process. In that case, you're going to want people that actually purchased, for one, and then you want them to have done that recently. So like if you're sending out a survey and someone bought something from you like 6 months ago or a year ago, the process isn't fresh in their mind anymore, so it's going to be pretty hard to get reliable answers about what they were thinking at that time. And even like questions about motivation, like trying to understand their decision-making process. Like if all this is ancient history for them, then they're not going to like really give you a lot of insight in their answers. But if it's like, you know, you're just trying to like get an idea of, you know, things that are not related to a specific experience, like, you know, what are their, you know, general things about the person. Like sometimes we just ask, what can you tell us about yourself? And people are not going to forget that anytime soon. So you could target a question like that to a lot larger list.
In terms of tools of how to actually compile the survey, the one we use most often is Typeform, just because it's really easy to use and you can include a link to the survey on email. But there's like lots of different tools you can use. You can use Hotjar, SurveyMonkey, I don't know, Google Forms, basically whatever you want. But you should use something, not just put the questions in your email and hope that people reply to your email.
Yeah, Typeform is kind of widely regarded as having the best UX for the person filling out the survey. Mm-hmm. Like it has kind of an easy flow. You know, answer the question and it just slides you down to the next one. It's not clunky at all. It's pretty easy to make it look good as well. Like you can customize it so that it matches your site's branding and has your logo and stuff like that. And it has some like good options for you know, conditional logic and different question types and things like that. So it's a pretty good default go-to tool. It's not crazy expensive either, so.
Yeah, but I guess another thing is that going overboard with conditional logic is like not really beneficial anyway. Like you should try to keep the flow as simple as possible, and yeah, especially because in the analysis part, it makes your job way easier as well.
Yeah, that's probably like maybe even the #1 tip on how to make your life easier. other than the other solution that we're going to be talking about. But if you're going for open-ended questions and you want to make the analysis process not like easy, but just not ridiculously complex, then keep the conditional jumps to a minimum and just have it like each question be on its own as a question, and then you just like look at it as like a unit.
Point number 3, let's say that you got your questions together, sent out the survey, got your responses, you have a good sample size to start analyzing your data. How do you actually do it? So this is the heavy lifting part, the part that takes a lot of time and manual work usually. Basically the usual process, how it goes is you go into your survey tool, you download the responses, you upload them in an Excel file or Google Sheets usually, and then basically start going through each question's responses and trying to find different themes and matching those answers to different themes and seeing which themes are most popular.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the way you described it kind of doesn't make it sound all that tedious, but like the actual process is like this big spreadsheet with all the responses down one side, and then every time you notice a theme, you start a new column, and then you just start manually putting ones in the column where that theme matches that response. And so, you know, you have say 10 questions and you have 200 responses, then that means you're literally typing ones like thousands of times before you're done with this process for just one survey.
Yeah, exactly. And it just takes a lot of time to actually read through the responses and try to understand what the person is saying. So you have to have a pretty good understanding of your client or the product that you're working on, because sometimes the answer might seem really random and doesn't make sense, but it's actually the client is talking about the specific product or issue that is somewhere on the website. So you have to have a pretty good understanding about the flow that you're asking them about as well.
So like in that process, it really often involves like a lot of going back and forth too. Mm-hmm. Like your first pass through the responses, you know, you'll start adding some of the themes that you're noticing and stuff like that, and then you can get like halfway through or more, and then, you know, see another response that makes you understand more about the previous responses you read. And then you're like, okay, there's another theme that I wasn't tagging there. So now I need to go back up to the top, add a new column, and then go through those responses again to see like, you know, which people mentioned this other theme that now is on your radar after being partway through.
Yeah, and then with this kind of work especially, it's even pretty beneficial to take breaks or not do it like all in a row, because you need some time to like process, or like there's just a lot of like data to go through, and you really like need to process and try to understand where the customers are coming from.
Yeah, that's really what this is about, is understanding your customers or your potential customers and developing empathy with them. And so that's why it's like really important to like, you know, do this process and like actually read through all these responses. Because, you know, this is, in some cases, this is the closest contact that you get to your customers. Like, it's not very often feasible in digital marketing to, you know, go on the street and interview them one-on-one or something like that. You know, sometimes you can put together like a call with like, you know, a Zoom call with a handful of them or something. But, you know, at scale, getting like actual voice of customer data, like directly from the people, and then like you developing an understanding of what they're talking about, like that's kind of the crux of this whole process.
Okay, so moving on to the next point, number 4. What are the problems with this process? Like, so there are different layers of it, I guess. The first one is that it just is a lot of manual work that nobody wants to do. And that's why a lot of the researchers, I think, sometimes choose more simple survey methods, like, you know, multiple choice or something, because those are super easy to analyze. Like, you don't basically have to do anything, just like even your Excel sheet will calculate it for you how many people said a specific same answer. But we are not about that life. We want actual insights.
Like the typical process that most people use for this, like we described a bit, it's you know, a lot of those entering ones into cells to tag like the matches. But other than that, there's a lot of like copying and pasting. Like you need to like, you know, first get the data into the sheet, and then you need to have a separate sheet for each question so that you can even do this process of tagging the ones and stuff like that. And then once you've gone through all that, then you need to like add up all these numbers and sort them and compile them into some sort of format that you can use to communicate these to someone, or put them in a report or something.
That amount of manual work and just a single person trying to interpret some kind of data can pretty often lead to just human error, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, especially if the person like going through these themes and whatever, like they interpret it one way, but then they have to kind of explain it to, I don't know, different stakeholders and team members, then like it's pretty important that everyone kind of understands the insights, because they can be a gold mine to, I don't know, create new tests, or I don't know, create new copy for your website or something like that. But if people have a different understanding of what the problems actually are, then it's not very beneficial.
Yeah.
Just because it is so much work, like it can take you like several days to get through an actual 10-question survey to put it together as a proper, I don't know, conceivable result-based report or whatever. It's just people obviously get tired of that and they start to get lazy. Like if you just like read through those responses and I don't know, something doesn't fit under your already predetermined themes, you start to like categorize things in a one sort of overall topic that isn't very specific and helpful.
There's kind of like two ways to go wrong with coding the surveys. Like one is combining themes that shouldn't be combined, that are actually like separate ideas. And like one common one that I've noticed pretty often is payment problems. So like people will be coding a survey, people are talking about how they had issues with payments, and they'll kind of lump that all together. Anything that's payment related, you know, put that in one category. But there's often two subcategories of those. One is people think the product is too expensive and don't want to pay the money for it. Or there's people that actually want to pay for it but have trouble with the UX. Like there's either their card wasn't supported or something went wrong with the checkout or something like that. So like those are very different issues, and you should absolutely not just lump those all together. But if you're kind of just trying to get through it quick, you'd be like, oh yeah, it's something about payment. Okay, let's just slot that together.
Yeah, I think especially those like money related issues, it's one that I've seen pretty often is also like a certain group of people says that they're not sure if the value is there for that product, and other people just say that why didn't you buy, because of money or whatever. So people tend to lump those two together when actually like the value group are people who would like happily pay for it if they understood the value, for example. So they're also like pretty different things.
Yeah, like affordability versus just being on the fence about whether the value trade-off is there.
Like all of those together kind of in different teams, and especially with like senior people, lead to a point where like senior people tend to see this work as this manual kind of grunt work that needs to be delegated to junior employees. And then it kind of creates this gap as well, where maybe the junior employee doesn't really have as broad of an understanding of the client and or the product, because maybe they don't have as much, I don't know, insight into it or experience with the client, or, you know.
Yeah, and even just understanding what certain terms mean in the context of a specific business or industry or something like that. Like, it's pretty common that, like, you know, there's some word that maybe has a general meaning, but if you knew a little bit about the website or the business, then you'd understand that it actually, there is something like significant there to that specific term that like changes how you interpret it. So if you're just kind of bringing in some person just to help out with what you see as tedious work, and they haven't really been exposed to other parts of the research or aren't familiar with the business, then they're going to make little mistakes like that, and then that's a huge missed opportunity to like actually understand what's going on. I mentioned that there was like 2 common mistakes. So rather than like combining things that shouldn't be combined, it's the opposite of that, which is like separating things that
should be the same thing.
Yeah, separating things that should be the same thing. The double negatives kind of got me a little confused there. But yeah, that can be just as much of an issue. Like it's kind of the same thing, but just the other side of the coin.
And in the reporting kind of section, you will think that it's not as big of an issue because the percentage of people saying it is low, when actually like different categories should be under one category, and it actually turns out to be a pretty big issue.
Yeah, exactly. In some cases you might want both. Like say someone says I had a problem with the checkout process because I picked Apple Pay, and then another person is like, oh, I had a problem with the checkout because I picked PayPal. Then you're gonna want to get an idea of like how many people are just having a problem with the checkout regardless of like which option they chose. But probably you're going to want to drill into that and actually look at like how many people have problems with Apple Pay versus, PayPal. So like sometimes you need to do like a kind of like dual coding where you have like some of the higher level issues and then you also split those out into like some smaller ones. But if you only have the smaller ones, then it's going to look like, oh, there's just a couple small issues here, just a couple % of people had them. But if you actually added all those up, it could be a significant percentage of people having trouble with your checkout process.
We've reached the final part of this video. What are the solutions to these problems? It's as we just said, there's a lot of manual work, but it's probably worth it anyway. But should we still try to like automate some of it to take the kind of frustrating parts about the analysis out of it as much as we can, so we can, speed up the process and get better insights out of it? So how do we do that? Like, obviously there are solutions like word clouds that you could use, but those don't really give you, again, anything really specific that you can use.
Yeah, and also they just pick one word. Like I haven't really seen phrase clouds, So, you'll end up with like a lot of words that people use commonly, just scoring pretty high. And like sometimes the word clouds are useful just as an extra thing, but you definitely wouldn't want to like replace your whole coding process with that and like only rely on what word clouds show you.
Yeah, exactly, because if you will do a word cloud for an e-com survey, the biggest word that comes out will be price. And then, what do you do with that? Like, what is the issue with the price again? Like, you don't really know what to do about it.
Yeah, and I think that issue is kind of the core of the main problem with automating this process too much. Like there's lots of different ways that you can do that, like word cloud being one, or like, getting AI, like natural language processing stuff involved. And, so it's the same kind of thing. Like you can have somebody mention a term and like say with like sentiment analysis or something like that, if someone were to say like, everything I tried before this was total garbage and didn't work for me and I hated it until now. So any sentiment analysis tool is going to read that phrase that I just said as extremely negative. Like you're using all these like, negative words, like this person must be so unhappy with your product. But actually the actual sentiment of what they're saying is positive. They're just, using some contrast between like then and now to like illustrate their point. And, AI tools, they're not good at understanding. Well, they don't understand anything. So that's why.
Yeah, basically like robots are still not a real replacement here for humans. Like you still need someone with a brain go through these answers and make sense of them. You should only like automate the really manual parts of, the copy and pasting and, making sure that you don't miss any of the answers.
That's the right balance, is to make use of technology to just take care of the tedious stuff so that it's not a bunch of repetitive copying and pasting, but don't try to use the technology to replace the human understanding part of the equation.
So since we have been doing this kind of work for years now, we have run into these problems so many times, been frustrated with all this work so many times, but still like we need to do this because we see the value. So we've been working on this sort of survey analysis template for a while now that kind of solves some of these problems. And Ryan did a whole separate video of a walkthrough and how to actually use that template correctly, which we'll link somewhere down below or to this video as well, so you can take a look at that if you are in the same business and you need to analyze surveys and you want to make it easier on yourself. But basically there is a free resource now on our website. You can go there, read more about it, see the walkthrough, and see if maybe it's useful for you as well.
Yeah, and we think that this strikes a really good balance between taking care of some of the tedious stuff for you. Like, we don't have to go in a lot of detail because we have resources about that, but basically it eliminates most of the copying and pasting and a good chunk of putting manual ones in little boxes for anything that matches what some people said. And then also like the tabulating of the results. So once you've gone through the process of coding, 10 questions, you're going to have a sheet at the end that automatically like sorts the results and compiles them and just presents them in like neat little spots. So you can, put them in a report or do what you want with them.
A free resource, totally available on our website. We'll link it everywhere with a walkthrough of how to use it. If you have more questions, let us know on LinkedIn or somewhere. You know how to reach us probably.
Yeah, and we're also really interested in feedback because we've worked with this ourselves, and we see it as something that we plan to continually improve. So if we can get more people using this and understand, what sort of things might be holding them up or what things are confusing or what we can improve, then that will help us and help us help you.
Yeah, exactly. And this template is just not something we created out of the blue. Like, we've been thinking about these problems for years, as I said, and we actually use it in our everyday work all the time. So yeah, as you said, we'll probably keep on improving on it, and hopefully we'll get more feedback from you guys and we'll make it even better.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.